Andrew, good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you.
So, for people that kind of don't know, Andrew Adolph is quite renowned in the world of Canadian tax for, having a tenure, within the CRA for 25 years, right?
Right. Yeah.
Right. And I'd love to kind of, introduce you to, the broader audience on LinkedIn, kind of who you are, like what you did, and yeah, like your journey out throughout.
Yeah. My journey throughout. I think I was just kind of born to be involved in tax. There's just, some certain people have their callings and it seems to sort of fit me well. So I went to school for accounting. And after getting out of school, I went to work for the tax department. Originally, it was part-time, but I ended up getting in right at a really good time because Canada was just bringing in its goods and services tax. And I believe it was January 1st, 1991. I'm trying to think. For some reason, I think maybe it was January 31st, 1990. But anyways, I was hired actually 6 months before that tax went in. And at the time, even the legislation wasn't finalized. We were going off kind of partial legislation. And also, it was called the explanatory notes to Bill C-62, which was the legislation in development. And so I really came in through just a very pure legislative door. We really, if there was ever a problem, we always went to the legislation to see what the legislation said. And this has been lost in time, and people really don't go to the legislation. I always like to sort of be able to anchor myself to the legislation.
So, like,
And
are
yeah,
you telling
yeah,
me that, like, when you started off your professional career, the like indirect tax didn't exist?
indirect tax, well, it did exist. Indirect tax it's kind of like, what do you call it? More like a generic term that covers all sales taxes in a way. Like income tax is a direct tax because you file your income tax return, that's you, right? But when it comes to sales taxes, you're actually collecting from other people and sending it in for them. And so that's kind of like what indirect tax means to me. It covers, like, there's the GST, which is a value added tax, and then there's the PST in British Columbia, which is not the same as a value added tax because there's no recovery mechanism. There's a few exemptions, but that's kind of a different thing. So I'd say indirect taxes have been around for a long time. The term itself, didn't become familiar with it until maybe the early 2000s.
Really? Okay. So specifically, when you say that, like the legislation hadn't rolled in, like, what are you specifically referring to?
The legislation at the time, it just gets enacted on this, I think it's, yeah, January 1st, 1990, pretty sure was the day that the GST came in.
The GST.
And
GST.
the,
Got it.
yeah, the GST, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's a pretty fascinating story because I don't think many people can say that they live and breathe and like still to date are working in the tax realm with before the birth of GST, right?
I'm one of the few ones, and I got to say, like, most of my friends, they've retired now, and they don't want to, they just want to go and be retired, and I'm not like that at all.
So I'm kind of curious that like when it first like started, right, GST, like how did people react? Like how did like auditors react? Like because when you like are rolling out a new thing, like there is no like you created the benchmarks, right? You created a standard essentially.
Yeah, people hated it at first. It actually replaced an existing tax. There was an old tax called the federal sales tax, and that was in effect, it was a lot like the provincial sales tax works. It was in effect, but it only was like manufacturers and stuff like that. And it kind of came to where it was shooting Canada in the foot to have a manufacturer's tax.
Mm.
And so they brought in this new GST, which replaced the old manufacturer's tax. So where there used to be like 70,000, they called them licensees. Now in GST, we call them GST registrants. So it went from 70,000 licensees to 1.8 million registrants when the GST came in. Consumers, suddenly they could see it on their bills, like their restaurant bills. I remember that. And they don't like seeing that there. There's extra tax. It
Mm.
never used to be on there. So they didn't like it. I remember there was a sandwich tree restaurant in Nanaimo that refused to collect it, and for a couple of years, and it was a bit of a story. Businesses didn't like it because it was more work to do, and you got to file these reports and send it in. But then they realized that we get to claim back the input tax credits. Like you couldn't explain it to them up front, like in a way that they would like it. But then now that it's been around for 20 or 30 years, like, oh yeah, this is a better system than the old FST was because
Mm,
we can get money back. There's registrants out there who they just get refund claims. I think, like we were dealing with one this morning, it's refund claims because, they're based in Canada, but they got worldwide. So there's no GST to collect on anybody outside Canada. So you got all of these people who are effectively exporters who get to claim back their GST that they buy, and that removes the GST from exports. It makes them cheaper
mm,
to, people in the United States and whatnot who are claiming it. So businesses really, really like it. They don't like the PST because they can't claim it back,
right.
especially those exporters who want to be able to claim it back. They want it as cheap as possible to make it more sellable.
Yeah.
So it's the businesses like the GST, consumers, they're never going to like the GST, but
Yeah,
that's the way
I
it is.
personally prefer the GST HST portal much more than the QST portal, especially when it came to stuff like registrations, because I've had to deal with
Yeah.
those, and even the forms I heard is like better these days. But yeah, it's such a fascinating story, right? I'm curious though. Like you told me you went from like 18,000 to like like 180,000 in like a year. Like
No, it went from like 70,000 licensees who, they would be larger companies that, make stuff, maybe sales wholesalers. These would be like big companies-ish,
right,
or maybe they'd be medium to large companies.
sure,
But this was like with the GST, it was a much wider net and it's catching
right.
all of these small businesses now. So it went from 70,000 to 1.8 million overnight.
70,000 to 1.8 million. How many years?
Just overnight, like
Over
the
overnight,
FST
overnight,
died on December
overnight.
31st, and GST became
That's
new.
crazy. That's crazy. How on earth did you scale? Like, how did the work scale? Because like you were working, and like suddenly it went from like 70,000 to 1.8 million. Like, how on earth did the CRA scale at the time like this?
It was, I remember working overtime and they hired us. We didn't even know why they hired us in the beginning but it turned out it was to be auditors. But I remember in the beginning, we were working like there was a section called registration, which is where they register the companies. And I just kind of remember that we were putting these stickers on file folders. The doctor's office and they got the file wall and they've got those stickers on them down the side of the file and they're different colors.
Mhm.
It's kind of an older thing. But anyways,
Yeah,
we were
yeah, yeah.
doing
I've
that for
seen him.
all
I've
of our
seen him. Yeah.
we've done it for all of our we did it for all of our registrants. So I remember like several weeks in a row we're going in there making up these files for registrants and putting in their registration form into the file. And then I don't even think it was 10 years later they just got rid of them all. It's like we don't need paper, we don't need these
Hold on. Did you not have
files.
a
Like
computer in 1990s?
no, it was we started off without computers, but then they gave us laptops,
Okay.
and then we were all working with laptops, but it was a little bit half and half. Like we had ledger sheets and stuff like that we were doing math on and adding up with a calculator and stuff like that in the beginning. I think there was even an ashtray in the office when I started.
That's so funny. I can't imagine. I was born after the computer era, so like a non-computer related workflow just that boggles my mind. But I okay, so that's interesting. I okay, so and the laptop, and then like after the laptop, I'm assuming it slowly transitioned kind of into the like the internet era, right?
Yeah, we still had laptops, and that's how when we went out to clients, we always had a laptop with us, and big heavy laptops. They're like anchors.
And
And
like do you have any like anchors like suitcases?
yeah, they were like big, like they were. I mean, and I'm a big guy, but it was a kind of like heavy hauling these laptops around and plugging them in, and the batteries, of course, wouldn't be very good, and so it seems a little bit primitive, and with some of the equipment that we had, but there's better equipment now.
That's so fascinating. That's really interesting to me because I've only seen them on like from like photos on like old Google searches, but anyways. So I'm curious, like any fun stories you had during your tenure as 25 years as an auditor? Like kind of interesting things that started to come up because like one thing that's so I because most people don't know what auditors actually do, right? They just get a notice and like they have to answer a bunch of questions. But I'm curious on as just like how life evolved because it's at the end of the day, the thing that's so complex about, indirect tax overall is just like a lot of it is like the interpretation of the law, right? So I'm just curious, like how that initially started, like how people, do you compare notes, like what happens as like technology became better over time and volume started to go up, right? And statutes become updated.
Yeah, the it's funny. Like I don't know that I would recommend the profession to a lot of people because to me it was like a little bit of the frog in the boiling pot and not realizing that it's kind of a nasty job. You're going around and you're assessing tax against people. Like we're not looking when you're a CRA auditor, the name of the game is to assess tax and come back with it. So pretty much everywhere you go, you're an enemy in that workplace. And to be able to do that for, a number of years to me is like, I mean, it means you're a pretty special person. It might not be all in the right ways to be able to do that, right? I know there was people that I started with and they took the training, like I was telling you, we were hired 6 months before the tax even went in. They took the training and then they just left because they didn't really like to do the work. They didn't like they didn't like the setup and the situation with businesses who don't want you there and all of that kind of thing. So I know when I started, like it was the GST was alone and I thought, they're going to just merge this with the other provinces. And I was right about that. They did that in 1997. The government that did it actually won on the promise of getting rid of the GST and they wiped out the government that brought it in. So they promised that they were going to get rid of it. And then in the end, when they got in, they said, yeah, we did get rid of it. And then we just changed it to this new one. And it was kind of the same thing. So then it was called the GST HST. And that was kind of like the proof that it's not the GST, it's the GST HST. So they did that. And they merged it, and then I've also got this prediction that at some time everybody's general ledger is just going to have to be online with CRA, and they can come out and check it at any time, and you kind of lose your privacy. I can sort of see that happening,
Yeah,
but at the same time, that doesn't mean there's not going to be opportunities to recover
right.
tax that didn't get coded properly when the
Yep.
when the invoices were being entered.
Right. Yeah, the e-invoicing, right? It's starting to roll out in Europe, like by 2030, already happened in countries like Brazil and Korea. But that's I think one of the most fascinating things that I got to learn as I, started to work with you. Even though people think that they got it, right? Like income tax accountants think that they've got it, Office of the CFO thinks that they've got it, like they miss a ton of stuff, right? So I'm just curious, like, what kind of things that did you think about like as you kind of got out of the CRA, of like helping businesses like recover more like from their ledger? Like how did that kind of origin start for you?
It was just through a realization that I was pretty good at finding where the person's owed tax, but, when I was a CRA auditor, we only combed in the one direction. And that if you combed in the opposite direction, you might be able to find where people have overpaid. And there's all sorts of different reasons why. One that I was just thinking of just now was a place that they were paying rent to the city. So in the city of New Westminster, in this case, it was $5,000 a month rent. And, you would see the journal entry and they were like, where's the GST? They must have charged you the GST. And they did not. But when you go into the actual contract I guess it's called the lease, it says right in there that the $5,000 includes GST. So that
Mm-hmm.
means we can carve that GST out and claim it as GST instead of as an expense. And so, and we just carved out something like that. And so that's all based on they figured that I think they thought that because it was paid to the government, the city, that there would be no tax on it because it's the city. But that's not how it works. It was for the
Right.
city, it's a commercial activity, what it's doing, renting out.
Yep. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I guess, like, it's when you like, I remember you mentioning briefly, that after your stint at the, CRA, it was a long one, right? 25 years. You thought that you would start offering this as a service for businesses, right? And
Yeah.
that like, were you like one of the first ones to ever attempt that?
Well, there's other ones out there, like, Ryan is a big firm out of Houston, and they do it, but I never really know that much about it. There's not a lot about it on the internet, and there was a firm in Ontario that I did work 1 gig for them, but they weren't able to find anything in BC because they were in Ontario. So, and Ontario's more lucrative because they've got 13% HST. So, yeah, we did some in BC, but I wasn't very good at marketing, and that was kind of like I think the missing thing is to, be able to show businesses that, this is free cash in your walls, so to speak.
But, aside from Ryan Tech, you were, like, one of the first guys to kind of, like, go out and do it after your, CRA audit gig, which
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that's pretty cool, right? Because, like, now it's a whole entire industry, right? But, like, for you, like, you were one of the first ones that got there, so it's just that's one of the most things that was, like, fascinating to me, right? Because, like, for me, when this company started, I kind of got to know about this space after speaking with a lot of accounting firms in Toronto who said, there's no good, like, tech solution provider for, like, kind of
Yeah.
automating and streamlining this, right? So, you know
That's a good comment. That's fair. Yeah, there really isn't. There's a few tools, but I think what they mean is we would really like something that can crawl through our GL and find it. There's
Right.
nothing that can do it.
Right, yeah. And kind of like, to wrap it up, I guess, these days, with the rise of AI, right, obviously it helps a lot when it comes to, tax related work, anywhere from data to interpretation. But, there also comes the other side, right? Because I assume auditors might also start utilizing AI in shape or form. If they do, maybe they don't.
Oh yeah,
But
I'm
yeah,
sure they
like, so, like,
will.
what kind of things are coming up these days more and more as, like, the auditors are starting to get dangerous with AI, and how should businesses prepare?
I think AI is going to sort of like be able to crawl through your general ledger and look for certain things that are indicators of where, a shareholder is, taking stuff from their business. Like it will really be able to drill down into a person's GL and actually pull the highest likelihood candidates for the auditor, and they'll just actually do that work. Whereas it used to be the auditor would have to actually go through the general ledger and do a little bit of work to find out where those adjustments are.
Mm,
So
okay.
I think more and more it's just going to do it for a lot of the work for the auditor. A lot of it is documentation that they're not always good at. Like if you were to look at some of the files, you might be astonished at how bad they are.
Mm,
And I think there probably is quality problems with their audit. So I think their quality will pick up and they may actually be able to do more audits as a result.
okay, so the
It's not
general
such a good
number
thing.
of audits will go up, data preparedness will also become much more scrutinized.
Yeah, like they will have a whole IT. We used to have one person in our office, our CRA office, that was you would go to if you needed to get data from your client. They would kind of go out there and get the data and get it to you. I think there's going to be whole teams of that now.
Mm, okay. Yeah, that's very helpful, information for a lot of, I think, accounting, finance professionals to know because especially when it comes to big companies, audits can sometimes go multiple years, right? Because they're,
Yeah,
yeah, so like, preparedness, on a going forward basis will become even more important if they, don't want to deal with a notice letter from the CRA more and more as, audits go up, right? So
right.
yeah. So I think today, this is a great episode. Let's do another one next week. And
Okay.
I'd love to kind of dive into areas of anything from like how do cash businesses get audited when auditors come back, right? All the way up to what kind of happens. I think as technology evolves, like what are some of the neat toolings or techniques that you can do to make your data much more better, or like make sure that you're going on a better place for tax related things. So great conversation today. Great first
Yeah,
podcast, and yeah,
enjoyed it.
looking forward to speaking again next week.
Okay, good stuff. Thanks, David.
Bye.